the three musicians. Once upon a time, three musicians left their home and set out on their travels. They had all learnt music from the same master, and they determined to stick together to seek their fortune in the foreign lands. They wandered merrily from place to place and made quite a good living, and were much appreciated by everyone who heard them play. One evening, they came to a village where they delighted all the company with their beautiful music. At last, they ceased playing and began to eat and drink and listen to the talk that was going on around them. They heard all the gossip of the place, and many wonderful things were related and discussed. At last, the conversation fell on a castle in the neighborhood, in which many strange and marvelous things were told. One person said that a hidden treasure was to be found there, another that the richest food was always to be had there, although the castle was uninhabited, and a third that an evil spirit dwelt within the walls, so terrible that anyone who forced his way into the castle came out of it more dead than alive. As soon as the three musicians were alone in their bedroom, they agreed to go and examine this mysterious castle, and, if possible, to find and carry away the hidden treasure. They determined, too, to make an attempt separately, one after the other, according to age, and they settled that a whole day was to be given in each adventure to try his luck. The fiddler was the first to set out on his ventures, and did so in the best spirits and full of courage. When he reached the castle, he found the outer gate open, quite as if it were expecting guests. But no sooner had he stepped across the entry than the heavy door behind him closed with a loud bang, and was bolted by with a huge iron bar, exactly as if the sentinel were doing his office and keeping watch. But no human being was to be seen anywhere. An awful terror overcame the fiddler, but it was hopeless to think of turning back or standing still, and the hopes of finding gold and other treasures gave him strength and courage to force his way further into the castle. Upstairs and downstairs he wandered, through lofty halls, splendid rooms, and lovely little boudoirs, everything beautifully arranged, and all kept in the most perfect of order. But the silence of death reigned everywhere, and no living thing, not even a fly, was to be seen. Notwithstanding, the youth felt his spirits return to him when he entered the lower regions of the castle, for in the kitchens the most tempting and delicious food was spread out. The cellars were full of the most costly wine, and the storeroom crammed with pots of every sort of jam you can imagine. The cheerful fire was burning in the kitchen, before which a roast was being basted by unseen hands, and all kinds of vegetables and other dainty dishes were being prepared in like manner. Before the fiddler had time to think, he was ushered into a little room by invisible hands, and there a table was spread for him with all the delicious foods he had seen cooking in the kitchen. The youth first seized his fiddle and played a beautiful air on it, in which it echoed through the silent halls, and then he fell to and began to eat a hearty meal. Before long, however, the door opened, and a tiny man stepped into the room, not much more than 3 feet high, dressed in a dressing gown, and with a small wrinkled face and a gray beard which reached down to the silver buckles of his shoes. And the little man sat down beside the fiddler and shared his meal. When they got to the game course, the fiddler handed the dwarf a knife and fork and begged him to help himself first, and then to pass the dish on. The little creature nodded, but helped himself so clumsily that he dropped a piece of meat he had carved on the floor. The good-natured fiddler bent down to pick it up, but in a twinkling of an eye the little man jumped on his back and beat him until it was black and blue all over his head and body. At last, when the fiddler was nearly dead, the little wretch left off and shoved the poor fellow out nearly dead out of the iron gate, which he had entered in such good spirits just a few hours ago. The fresh air revived him a little, and in a short time he was able to stagger with aching limbs back to the inn where his companions were staying. It was night when he reached the place, and the other two musicians were already fast asleep. The next morning, they were much astonished at finding the fiddler in bed beside them, and overwhelmed him with questions, but their friend hid his back and face and answered them very shortly, saying, uh, go there yourselves and see what's to be seen. It's a ticklish matter, I can assure you. The second musician, who was the trumpeter, now made his way to the castle, and everything happened to him exactly as it had the fiddler, and he was just as hospitably obtained and forced, and then just as cruelly beaten and belabored, so that the next morning he too lay in his bed like a wounded hare, assuring his friends that the task of getting into the haunted castle was no enviable one. Notwithstanding the warning of his companions, the third musician, who played the flute, was still determined to try his luck, and, full of courage and daring, set out, unresolved, if possible, to find and secure the hidden treasure. Fearlessly he wandered the whole castle, and as he roamed through the splendid empty apartments, he thought to himself, how nice it would be to live here always, especially with a full larder and a cellar at his disposal. The table was spread for him too, and when he had wandered about for some time, singing and playing the flute, he sat down as his companions had done, and prepared to enjoy the delicious food that was spread out in front of him. Then the little man with the beard entered as before, and seated himself beside the flute player, who wasn't the least startled by his appearance, but chatted away with him as if he had known him his whole life. But he didn't find his companion very communicative. At last they came to the game, and, as usual, the little man let his piece fall to the ground. The flute player was good-natured, just going to pick it up, when he perceived the little dwarf was in the act of springing on his back. Then he turned around sharply and seized the little creature by his beard, and gave him such a shaking that he tore his beard out. And the dwarf sank groaning to the ground. But as soon as the youth had the beard in his hands, he felt so strong that he was fit for anything, and he perceived all sorts of things in the castle that he had not noticed before. But, on the other hand, all strength seemed to have gone from the little man. He whined and sobbed out, "Oh, give me my beard again, and I will instruct you in all the magic art that resides in the castle, and it will help you carry off the hidden treasure, which will make you rich and happy forever." But the cunning flute player replied, "I will give you back your beard, but you first must help me as you have promised to do. You will do all that you have done so, and I won't let your beard out of my hands." Then the old man found himself obliged to fulfill his promise, though he had no intention of doing so, and had only desired to get his beard back. He made the youth follow him through dark secret passages, underground vaults, and gray rocks, till they at last came to an open field which looked as if it belonged to a more beautiful world than ours. Then they came to a stream of rushing water, but the little man drew out a wand and touched the waves, whereupon the water parted and stood still, and the two crossed the river with dry feet. And how beautiful everything on the other side was. Lovely green paths leading through woods and fields covered with flowers, birds with gold and silver feathers singing in the trees, lovely butterflies, glittering beetles fluttered about and crawled everywhere, and dear little beasts hid in the bushes and hedges. The sky above them was not blue, but like rays of pure gold, and the stars looked twice their usual size, and far more brilliant than anything on our earth. The youth grew more and more astonished when the little gray man led him into a castle far bigger and much more splendid than the one they had left. Here, too, the deepest silence reigned. They wandered all through the castle and came at last to a room in the middle of which stood a bed, hung all around with heavy curtains. Over the bed hung a bird's cage, and the bird inside it was singing beautiful songs into a silent space. The little gray man lifted the curtains from the bed and beckoned the youth to approach. On the silk cushions embroidered with gold, a lovely maiden lay sleeping. She was as beautiful as an angel, with golden hair which fell in curls over her marble shoulders, and a diamond crown sparkled on her forehead. But a sleep as of death held her in its spell, and no noise seemed to awaken the sleeper. Then the little man turned to the wondering youth and said, "See, here is a sleeping child. She is a mighty princess. The splendid castle and this enchanted land are hers, but for hundreds of years she has slept in this magic sleep, and during all that time no human being has been able to find their way here. I alone have kept guard over her, and have gone daily to my own castle to get food and to beat the greedy old gold seekers who seek their way into my dwelling. I have watched over this princess carefully all these years, and saw that no stranger came near her. But all my magic power lay in my beard, and now that you have taken it away, I am helpless. I can no longer hold the beautiful princess in her enchanted sleep, but am forced to reveal my treasured secret to you. So set to work and do as I tell you. Take the bird which hangs over the princess's head, and which by its song sang her into this enchanted sleep, a song which it has had to continue forever. Take it and kill it, and cut its little heart out and burn it into a powder. Then put it into the princess's mouth. Then she will instantly awaken and bestow on you her heart and hand, her kingdom, her castle, and all of her treasures." The little dwarf paused, quite worn out, and the youth did not wait long to do his bidding. He did all he was told, carefully and promptly, and having cut the little bird's heart out and proceeded to make it into a powder. No sooner had he placed it in the princess's mouth than she opened her lovely eyes, and looking up into the happy youth's face, kissed him tenderly, thanked him for freeing her from her magic sleep, and promised to be his wife. At the same moment, a sound of thunder was heard all over the castle, and on all the staircases, and in every room sounds were to be heard. Then a troop of servants, male and female, flocked into the apartment where the happy couple sat, and after wishing the princess and her new bridegroom joy, they all dispersed over the castle to their different occupations. But the little gray dwarf now began to demand his beard again from the youth, for in his wicked heart he was determined to make an end of all their happiness. He knew that if only his beard were once more on his chin, he would be able to do what he liked with them all. But the clever flute player was quite a match for the little man in cunning, and said, "All right, you needn't be afraid. You shall get your beard back before we part, but you must allow my bride and me to accompany you a bit on your way homeward." The dwarf could not refuse the request, and so they all went through the beautiful green paths and flowery meadows, and came at last to the river which flowed for miles around the princess's lands and formed the boundary of her kingdom. There was no bridge or ferryman to be seen anywhere, and it was impossible to get over to the other side, for the boldest swimmer would not have dared to brave the fierce current and roaring waters. Then the youth said to the dwarf, "Give me your wand in order that I may part the waves." And the dwarf was forced to do what he was told before the youth still kept his beard for him. But the wicked little creature chuckled with joy and thought to himself, "A fool, the youth will hand me my beard as soon as we have crossed the river, and then my powers will return, and I will seize my wand to prevent them both from returning to their beautiful country." But the wicked dwarf's intentions were doomed to disappointment. The happy youth struck the water with his wand, and the waves once parted and stood still, and the dwarf went on in front and crossed the stream. No sooner had he done so than the waters closed behind him, and the youth and his lovely bride stood safe on the other side. Then they threw his beard to the old man and crossed the river, but they kept the wand, so that the wicked dwarf would never again enter their kingdom. So the happy couple returned to their castle, and lived there in peace and plenty forever after. But the other two musicians waited in vain for the return of their companion, and when he never came back, they said, "Oh, he's gone to play the flute. till the saying passed into a proverb, and was always said of anyone who set out to perform a task from which they never returned.